Welcome back to the Green Flash podcast, live from Paris, France. It's not live. We've talked about meeting the smugglers, our struggles to make the film, and our acquired taste for stone crab claws. And were we to follow a semi-traditional storytelling process, we might have saved you something for the end. But there are few true surprises in life. In fact, it's jammed full of lunar regularities and time-based change. So it's no surprise that Steve died in 2024. The unexpected was actually how he kept on living for so long. How through decades of physical work and play, addiction to drugs and alcohol, and an easygoing temperament that was well suited to randomly ingesting a poisonous substance or walking in front of traffic on the beach, Steve Lamb died in a hospital, like most Americans, with fluids going out and drugs coming in. But that's not to say he went gentle into that good night. Steve was in and out of hospitals.
Why am I here? I was playing bumper car with a moped. You don't play bumper cars when you got a moped. Bumper cars have 4 wheels. Bumper mopeds have 2 wheels. So right there, it doesn't take a genius to figure out I got 2. She's got 4. Figure it out.
Are you in here because of your hip or because of pneumonia?
Oh, apparently they've added a new one on. I guess I got a pneumonia now. Never heard of it before. And a mouthful of turkey too. Gobble, gobble.
Yeah, just go ahead and swallow before we answer.
Oh, come on. Could you imagine editing this?
I'm gonna have to, but I cannot. I cannot.
Wait a minute, is that teak?
We've talked about it extensively. Maybe he was tempting death like the best of us. But what is certainly true is that he wanted to fucking live and live hard. He loved life. He loved his family, and he loved what we get to do while we're living. And without diving too far into the morose, we are able to look at Steve more so for what he taught us to do. Live and live life fully. In fact, without making this movie, Jodi and I probably never would have started surfing, or bought a cheap sailboat, rehabbed it, and learned to sail it. I know that I certainly wouldn't have reconnected with my love for fishing like I did. I was catching Spanish mackerel, Jack Caravel, sea bass, sea trout, redfish, permit fish, mangrove snapper, and a new Florida trophy for me, snook. Needless to say, Steve encouraged us to do the things we love and to appreciate the hell out of what a beach life has to offer. Now, it's important to note that much of this was implicit. Steve never said, go buy a sailboat and learn to sail. But he did talk about being 18 and taking a boat to Jamaica. He didn't say, go get barreled in Hawaii. But he did relentlessly talk about surf conditions and good surfing trips like they were beauties lost to the past. The persistence in his delivery was such that we could all listen, and listen for exhaustingly long shoots, just to get the one line that we all believed was something that everyone should hear. In the podcast, we've talked a lot about Ethan and Jodi's perspective on this person they were dealing with, but I feel special. As the producer under various descriptions, I had an in with Steve. I already talked about this in episode 3. But I think it bears repeating with documentary making in mind. The process requires building trust with your subjects, but it also requires shared interest to get to know them. There's a part of me that repels traditional networking or business savvy in conversation. Pin it on a Capricorn moon. I may not have any suavity, but I do have my own southern slyness. So I was less interested in playing Steve's games. Jodi and Ethan did a lot of smiling and waiting. I did a lot of frowning and waiting. And this was partly due to the fact that my job was often off camera. So forgive me for interjecting the zodiac and therapy into this. But it's important to realize that when Steve was talking about boats, guns, and fish on camera, it was partly because he and I had just spoken by the van about where I was fishing on Paso Grill, what boat would help me get to the right spot, and about dove hunting in South America. I like to think it was a part of loosening him up for the interview. But as Jodi and Ethan have already mentioned, Steve had more of a conversational loosener than stopper. He talked and talked and talked. And depending on the drug he was on, or how sober he was, we'd get any imaginable variety of incomprehensible stories that were always a degree or two off of Jodi's and Ethan's original question. But I was getting to know Steve for myself, and I'd like to think that it was necessary research for reflecting Steve through my other job as the film's composer. There's this tendency to put sad piano music or a string section on most documentaries. Take this theme from the film, for instance. Sad, right? Life is sad. It's hard. But Steve wasn't sad. So I knew something needed to change. I'd begun from afar in Atlanta composing all sorts of sad piano music. But then I'd get to St. Pete, put a little sunscreen on my neck, tie on a pompano rig, and listen to the wind pushing waves into the jetty. It didn't fit. There's an epic serenity to the ocean. Steve talks about it. So it wouldn't be impossible to implement such a theme. But our film, like Life in St. Pete Beach, wasn't always so profound. Sometimes it was just plain funny. As Ethan and Jodi have already talked about, it was sort of a revelation that our millennial penchant for a sad post-rock American dream was not aligned with our film's heroes. And partly this revelation made itself evident through the juxtaposition of the serious tone that many of our beloved smugglers' memoirs took. Sure, it was violent and dangerous, but what did it look like in the present? Well, a lot of Hawaiian shirts and wheelchairs.
How much of this film is just a story about old white men and their books?
87%, I mean, mostly, and I hope
books
it can
they've
be
written
like
about themselves.
treated with some humor and levity, because it is the joke, and the joke is intended, and like I think also that's part of what became really fun, is like thinking back to interviews that had to be silhouetted, and people who for good reason did need to take themselves and their circumstances very seriously, and then kind of zooming out and being like, all of these kooky people, many of these people we're dealing with are taking themselves really seriously, and the smugglers anyways, and that is funny and fun, and but also so beautiful and human, because we all want to be remembered, and that's just like one method they've seen modeled. It's not even necessarily to create celebrity or get rich, even though I think for some of them they certainly would have welcomed the opportunity. But it is just a little bit of a parody on the memoir, and these like self-written, self-published memoirs about what somebody did when they were young and wild. And then definitely I loved that we're playing with the fact that everyone in town wanted to write one and has their own, and then has their take on each other's books.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of moments where, we talk to someone who might have been in the film, might have not been in the film, but they're like, yeah, I wrote about 1,000 pages of my book this week. Oh, great, dude. Let us know when it's finished. You know who finished their book? All these people.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
finish your book.
exactly.
And it is funny to think too, like that maybe the most humble one of our memoirists wrote his book because he was asked to by the Coast Guard or the who asked
Maybe the Naval Institute.
The Naval Institute asked Charlie to write like a textbook basically
Right.
of his experiences.
Right,
So
it
like
was used to train.
it wasn't about his ego. Like
right,
it was just
right. It wasn't about his
he was asked to write
accomplishment.
it.
He also loved the work that he did and treated that like everything else with a sense of duty.
Right. It was duty. It wasn't like the glory days.
Right.
And his wife Carol Ann helped him
Yeah.
write that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. She was the.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Charlie was his field editor and scribe. Basically. They were the best.
Shout out to Charlie Fuss and Charlotte and family.
Yeah. Yeah, Charlie was the first person to let us into this story and say yes and return a phone call. And without him, none of it would have ever happened.
And and he's one of the ones that we love the most, and also he's one of the ones who passed before he could see the film. And I told his daughter Charlotte this, who's been so kind to us also since the film's come out, that like we'd already filmed 2 interviews with him, and we were just going to Fort DeSoto. I don't remember why we were going to shoot B-roll to maybe throw the drone up or something, and we saw Charlie and Carol Ann walking towards the beach or walking towards the clubhouse. And we were like, "Hey, what's up?" And he was like, we're gonna go watch the pelicans."
Yeah, they were just
And get a hot
watching
dog.
the American pelicans migrate in and get hot dogs. They were so sweet.
They were getting hot dogs and going to watch the pelicans.
They give us all something to aspire to. They're the
It's
best
like
couple.
that's the way you gotta live your life. Just getting hot dogs and watching the pelicans. Ethan here, just taking a quick second to let you all know about some friends of ours, Look Alive Coffee. Look Alive is a small batch coffee roaster out of St. Pete, Florida. They make fresh, seasonal coffees to fuel whatever you're working on. Whether it's a painting, a playlist, your favorite book, or a podcast based on a film, they're here to keep you energized and inspired. You can find them at lookalivecoffee.com. Now back to the show.
Charlie was a great example of a person who provided a lot of sobriety to Steve's unpredictability and wild versions of stories. And for that, he became a very valuable resource for us in making the film. And in his own stable way, he provided us with another version of this life by the water that was becoming so intriguing. And they were all putting it down in books. So we were presented with all of these varying perspectives of the story. And I kept thinking, I know they want Dust in the Wind for this and Gimme Shelter for that, but we're making our own film about them. And I know that Jimmy Buffett has his own version of what pot sounds like, but I think after talking to Steve today for 10 hours, it feels a lot like... We talked a lot about drugs, surfing, sex, family, and death. But there was this persistent thing that wouldn't go away. Everyone, but mainly Steve, kept talking about the green flash. So what is the green flash?
The green flash is a rare optical phenomenon that occurs during sunset or sunrise. It manifests as a brief green spot or ray above the sun's upper lip, lasting no more than 2 seconds. This occurs due to atmospheric refraction, where the Earth's atmosphere acts as a prism, separating sunlight into different colors. The green flash is most commonly observed over the ocean, where the horizon is unobstructed.
Important to note here, that was some wicked drumming that Seattle-based Peter Manson provided for the soundtrack. But here's Ethan and Jodi's thoughts on the phenomenon.
What do Florida people mean when they say the green flash?
So, the green flash is a phenomena that occurs when basically the clouds and the sky are just right and the sun is sinking below the ocean along the horizon. So you need to be looking out of a west coast. And as the sun dips below the horizon, if all of the conditions are just right, then at the very last second, there will be a super brief flash of green light. And if you've seen it, you've seen it. And if you don't, you're probably imagining the wrong thing. And so at some point in shooting, I mean, probably early on, I'd be curious to look back for the first mention, but Steve, as he would take us out to beaches and we'd go on these different shoots, he'd keep asking us if we'd ever seen the green flash, because particularly in St. Pete, one of the most charming things about that town is that people will go like with picnics and beach chairs and they'll sit out for the sunset every night, and one of the things they're looking for is a green flash. And so everybody on the west coast of Florida knows about it. Fishermen know about it. And Steve was always asking us about it, and then it just became clear that that's the metaphor for what we were doing, is looking out on the twilight of this person's life and waiting for this like brief, brilliant moment that will give us kind of the truth of everything, and then it will dip past the horizon and be gone. And so that occurred to Gresham, that it was kind of a perfect metaphor on that level. And also the green is kind of an allusion to money and to weed and to naivety. And the flash is, you know, kind of a great metaphor for the brevity of life. And particularly as Steve was looking back on his own life and commenting frequently on kind of how quickly things went by and his life as a whole, the high moments of his life, the low points of his life, it all just kind of speeds by so fast when you're looking at all of it in retrospect.
Have you seen it?
I have seen the green flash.
You have seen it?
I have seen the green flash once for certain.
And is it one of those things that, like, if you have seen it, you definitely know, like, it's not something that you think you might have seen?
I've
never seen it.
It can be faint.
I don't think I've seen it.
It can be faint, and it also can be more blatant. One of the eerie things is that on the day that the green flash premiered at Queens World Film Festival in New York on April 20th, 2024, there was like an unusually huge green flash seen on the Oregon coast. And that was like right after Steve had passed away, and his sister sent me a text with like the news story from this
Sue, shout out.
Yeah, from this big green flash in Oregon, and it just felt like a great sign.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And that was so much of the film, is you talk about the green flash being the perfect title that Gresham came up with. We had all these other working titles that I can't imagine, like in hindsight, they were so awful.
Right.
And we were so focused on that. We weren't listening to Steve, and he would be on the beach multiple times, like going back to my control issues and my control problems. I'm going to sound like a megalomaniac here, but it's like, all I wanted was for Steve to get a shot of Steve looking at the sunset on the beach. Just be contemplative. And I'd get him for about 2 seconds, and then he'd turn around towards me to the camera and he'd be like, "Have you seen the green flash? Have y'all seen it? It's great, isn't it?" He just couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop sharing with us this thing he wanted us to know about the green flash. He cared about it so much. And we weren't listening to him. I wasn't listening to him. All I knew is I needed my shot. And that's why that was the big learning moment for me in making the film was just like let go of control. Because even if you think you have it, you don't.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's like the green flash is the metaphor for everything Steve was telling us about. But then that experience for us, it's like realizing making this film is the metaphor for us just learning how to live our lives as adults, you know, and ideally content, grateful, satisfied people, you know. And I think that's also the like truth Steve was giving us over and over again. He was not coherently telling us the story that we wanted him to, but he was telling us so much that I think the three of us needed to hear and learn about life, you know. And the gift of that film was that just incidentally, well, not incidentally, it meant that we were always in the right place at the right time, and the trick was learning to see that and learning to recognize that for what it was. That there is no shot we're missing, there's no thing, you know, we were always where we were supposed to be and getting what we were supposed to get. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about our partners, Last Prisoner Project. The Last Prisoner Project is a nonprofit organization dedicated to cannabis-related criminal justice reform. As the United States moves away from the criminalization of cannabis, giving rise to a major new industry, there remains the fundamental injustice inflicted upon those who have suffered under America's unjust policy of cannabis prohibition. Through intervention, advocacy, and awareness campaigns, the Last Prisoner Project works to redress the past and continuing harms of these inhumane and ineffective laws and policies. We're using our film, The Green Flash, and this podcast to help the Last Prisoner Project raise money and awareness. Visit www.lastprisonerproject.org or text FREEDOM to 24365 to donate and learn more. Now, back to the episode.
As storytellers, we amassed as many metaphors for the green flash as we did public parking receipts in Pinellas County. But we had found ourselves in a deep pit of material. We'd be editing for another 4 years at our present rate of working. And I hadn't even gotten into the thick of the music. Early retirement wasn't really the move. It was, where on God's green earth can I spend the amount of time it's going to take to write, record, and mix all this music? Well, that's another story.
But back to Hub, we're going to drop off some paperwork, so I invite him to lunch, and then it's 54th, 4-lane highway. Anyway, long story short, we get in a friggin' wreck. And I'm looking for my wallet, which I left at this doctor's office, and I'm just looking on the floor, and all of a sudden, bam! And we got hit so hard, it was Mike's fault. He tried to jump 4 lanes, and a lady T-boned us just in the air, but I didn't see any of this shit happening. And it knocked us in the air, and we did a 180. We landed in the island of just a little one, only about this wide, perfect, facing the wrong way to ongoing traffic. And that's my story, and I'll stick with it. And the same spots. I hit on this side, right where the staircase. But you know what? The good Lord gives us trials and tribulations.
Where are you going to church these days?
With you guys.
Yeah.
I'm always going to church. Every breath I take's a blessing from the good Lord. Believe me, it is. Try holding your breath. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You believe. Isn't that nice? But we take that for granted. Don't even realize. It's just a little of air. Not the other. One is life and one is death. It's our choice. There's life and death in the Word. And the Word is very important what we say. You can tell your wife how much you love her and how glad you are.
After a few hours with Steve, he would say things like this. And we'd maybe miss it in the moment. But maybe that's what living is. So I'm thinking, when will I have time to do all this work? But I think it was right there in that breath of air. being in that moment, realizing that for me, for us, music was always a part of our lives. And so it was just happening. So a lot of the soundtrack would come in these moments of being there. We would find it in Steve's shoestrings and in our clever justifications for renting Parrot Park again. But a lot of it would be recordings made right there in the living room. I really felt like I was starting to understand Steve's mindset. In fact, I was sometimes lost in the same stream of conscious. And who's to say that that's not fun for a while? It would be irresponsible to tell you what the green flash means. Hell, it's even irresponsible to tell you what it means scientifically to see it. We'd be stripping the power of being somewhere to experience it. We can live our lives plugged up to machines with Soylent keeping our bodies running while we understand the world from our laptops. But that will never replace the experience of living. And that's what chasing Steve around taught me. Thankfully, I already believed it. So the transition wasn't that difficult. Sometimes we still need our voice in the wilderness to help us believe it, though. And Steve was that. For those of us too afraid to go out and live it, we have people like Steve. And true, that sort of living can wear us down till we are nothing more than an old man being carted around. But I'm gonna take Steve's choices with a grain of salt. We met a lot of angry, jealous, and rude people in the making of this film. And it'll always be the nut, the crazy 70-year-old riding a moped down a busy highway hoping to catch the green flash that'll be who I admire. And maybe that was something that I wouldn't have seen had I not been wrapped up in the making of this film. And that's where we hope to immortalize some of Steve for y'all.
I said I'll see you in the movies. All right, KOA, stand by. Go. Let's unplug that for a little bit. That's Hub. Said that he told you. I'm just fucking.
Looking for the Green Flash is a podcast written and produced by
Ethan Payne.
Gresham Cash.
and Jodi Cash. It features an original score and sound design by Gresham Cash. We made this podcast to support the premiere of our first feature-length film, The Green Flash. This August, we're taking The Green Flash on tour throughout Florida and Georgia. We'll host screenings and special events at independent theaters from St. Pete Beach to Key West to St. Augustine before we bring it home to Athens and Atlanta. For more updates, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The Green Flash Documentary, and sign up for our newsletter at www.thegreenflashdocumentary.com. Thank you so much for listening to Looking for the Green Flash. We'll see you in the movies.